has to do with looking at text complexity in the content areas. Okay, so let's now look at what is the nature of text complexity. So what are these factors? This diagram shows a three-part model for measuring text complexity developed in relation with the Common Core standard. So they have developed these models that can make us understand better the nature of text complexity. What are the components of this model? First, we have the quantitative measures, what we can count and compute, and maybe what a computer can see and measure. The qualitative measures, or text features that are best judged by human evaluation. Then, of course, specifically, the teacher who knows her students. And the third component is reader and task measures. So what the teacher does with the text in order to help students read and understand it. So you have quantitative, qualitative, and reader and task demands. Let's look at the quantitative side. Assigning a single measure or grade level equivalent or number is usually done based on sentence and word length, frequency of unfamiliar words, number of personal pronouns, and number of prepositional phrases. This can be counted and computed. This method typically uses what we call readability formulas. Here are examples of the traditional formulas, mostly Fry. The Fry readability formula is very familiar with many teachers. But recently, we do not need to do the manual thing. It can become very tedious. So you can, many of these have actually computer applications nowadays. An example of a readability formula, of course, you have mentioned. What do you do when you use the graph? First, we select 3 samples of 100 words each. Then we plot the average number. We count the syllables in those 100 words and the length, how many words per sentence within that 100-word sample. Then we graph it and we plot it against what we call the Fry readability graph. Of course, we need to sample quite well. So usually, if it's a book, you get a sample from towards the beginning, in the middle, and towards the end of the book. But if it's a short selection, then you can use the whole text as the sample and come up with this. Because you have 3 samples, then you get averages. Some of the factors that contribute to the complexity cannot be seen by Lexile or the Fry graph, okay? So we have to look at what do we mean by qualitative values. This include meaning, structure, language, and knowledge. When we speak of meaning, there might be layers of meaning within the text, okay? Something that is more literal, something that is, deep structure, okay? Something that is implicit and not explicit. Is the purpose explicit or clear enough for the reader, or it might be ambiguous, you cannot pinpoint the theme exactly or what the author wants to say. And then, of course, the complexity of the concepts. Siyempre, yung more general stories, short stories are easier to understand because the concepts belong to layman's experiences. But if you're looking at a science journal, that would be very difficult to understand because of the complexity of the concept. Nuclear fission. Can you understand its meaning by looking at the dictionary? You can look at the meaning of nuclear, then you can look at the meaning of fission, and then you put them together. Does that make you understand what nuclear fission means? No. It is a whole, Tingnan mo ang E equals mc squared. That's a very short formula. How many characters less? But you know how many hundreds of texts and experimentations and theoretical debates, etc., got into that particular formula? Siguro, ewan ko lang kung si Einstein yun, pero meron yatang nag-dissertation daw na 1 page lang ang kanyang sinabit. And that page is a formula. So you don't need to write 300 pages for your dissertation. But the amount of study that went into that formula is formidable. Diba? Okay. So sometimes it can be very short, but very, very hard to understand. Okay? Text features of structure. Structure means text feature. So the length of the sentences, whether they're complex, simple, okay, compound, complex, whatever. Some sentences are very long and there are so many commas. You get lost in reading it. Like when you read Nick Joaquin, sometimes one sentence straddles 2 pages. So you get lost kung alin na nga ba ang subject, alin ang main predicate. No? The genre, again, you are more familiar with narratives if you are a child, but not with all kinds of informational text. Rose kanina mentioned teaching explicitly text structure and how texts are organized. So that includes organization. When we speak of language, then, ito, iba pala yung text pictures doon. Sentence length and structure, the use of figurative language, the vocabulary, okay? The regional or historical usage. So sometimes text will carry some dialect words or what we call local color in literature. So that has also to be introduced to students. Knowledge have to do with, from the point of view of the students, what does the text demand in terms of the prior knowledge that is needed by the reader in order to understand the text. So his content knowledge, his disciplinary knowledge, intertextuality, meaning has he read and understood other texts that are related to this particular text, and his background and experiences. So actually, there are many factors that will contribute to text difficulty. These 3 emanate from the text, but this 4th one emanates from the reader. And it's their relationship with the text. So if we look at qualitative values from simple to complex text, in terms of meaning, when a text has only a single level of meaning, then it's easier than one with multiple levels. When the purpose is explicit, it's easier than a text with more implicit, obscure, or hidden purpose. Conventional structure versus unconventional structure. For example, if it's just chronological, like Goldilocks and the Three Bears, but if you have frequent use of flashbacks and other manipulations of time, then that becomes difficult. Did you take up Wuthering Heights? Are you familiar? when you read Wuthering Heights, mawawala ka dahil ang point of view nag-change. Lahat ng sections, there are several sections of the novel, but each one uses the I. But if you do not realize that the I's there are different people who are talking, one is quoting the other. So pag nag-quote siya, magiging I na naman yun. Then you will get lost in the process. No? So these are manipulations by the author that actually make the text difficult. Of course, language. You have seen how clear, simple language is easier to grasp than complex language. Lalo na kung may mga undertones ng irony, for example, or satire, or the author is making fun of someone. Kung hindi mo yun makatch, iba yung intindi mo sa text. You tend to take the text literally. So, pag nag-joke, hindi ka tatawa. Sabi mo, nasaan ang joke? Graphics, simple, unnecessary. You don't need a lot of graphics to understand the text. But here, essential yung graphics. Then it's about common day experiences for simple text and for it becomes more complex when the experiences being described are distinctly different from the reader's own experiences. Ayun sinasabi natin culture bound, mga ganon, di ba? And then perspective. So if you have single perspective, and especially if the perspective is like your own, then that's a simple text for you. But if there are multiple perspectives, you have to see the biases, the stances of each one, and kind of synthesize them. So for qualitative measures, sinong gagawa niyan? Who will decide whether this text is complex, simple, or the teacher, or maybe the author of the book, or the editor, okay, the ones who prepare learning material should be very aware of this, okay? Let's look at the summary statement about professional judgment. Please read.
Represents an informed decision about complexity in terms of several factors discernible to a human reader applying trained judgment to the task. It's important that this analysis is done systematically.
The third one is reader and task demand. So the question is, does the text demand prior or content knowledge in order to construct meaning? Are the ideas simple or complex and challenging? You are not taking the point of view of the reader. So simple texts have little assumed personal experience or cultural knowledge. Ang ibig sabihin ng assumed, required. Okay, so that means the ideas are simple, whereas very complex texts require extensive, demanding, assumed personal experience and or cultural knowledge. There are many new ideas and or complex, challenging concepts. Tasks. Tasks like text become more complex as students consider ideas and information in different ways. Locating and evaluating topical information. That's just simple. That's why the student is smiling. But let him do this. Locate, evaluate, and synthesize information from different sources. Nag-nosebleed na yung estudyante. Okay. So, nakikita nyo that this refer to one competency. But nakikita nyo dyan ang sinasabing spiral, skills progression. Okay? So the task becomes very difficult at this point. So you also not just consider the text, but what you make the students do with the text. Okay? The challenge of the tasks. Or also, you consider interest and motivation. Is the text highly motivating for the reader? Do they see value in the tasks assigned to them? So, relevance and level of interest. Obviously, not so interesting for this reader, but the task here, they are so engrossed, okay? So, also, we look at the affective component. So, scaffolds, anong implication nito? We should put scaffolds that will enable students to experience the text through more teacher assistance, rather than avoid the complexity of the text. So, we have to, grapple with the problem and see how we can help the readers. So, teachers need to read.
Readers understand the complexity of the text, be able to use a range of instructional strategies flexibly.
Okay, yan ang sinasabi natin. What do teachers need to know? First, you have to know, when you say you know your students, ano ibig sabihin mo? You know their names, of course. Maybe you even know their parents and their addresses. But here, what do we mean by knowing students? Teacher Vic.
Knowing their capacity, reading capacity,
Okay,
capabilities rather.
Okay, what else? Sorry.
Knowing their strengths and weaknesses.
Okay. Anything else? Yes, Winnie.
Overall, ma'am, knowing how they perform in your class. So
Okay.
you could give them a material which will really fit to their needs.
Okay, then?
Teachers should know their learners' learning styles and preferences.
Okay. What about interests? Okay, and relevance to their real life experiences. And then, of course, coupled with that, we should understand what makes the text complex or difficult for those students, and based on that, be able to use a range of instructional strategies flexibly. This diagram shows balancing support and challenges. So, as the task, as the student becomes more independent in the task, the level of teacher support decreases. So at the beginning of the lesson, when you teach a skill, hindi ba, you go through explicit teaching from introduction to modeling or teaching through guided practice and then independent practice, then the scaffolds are very heavy, or teacher support is very heavy at the beginning, and gradually we transfer the burden to those of the students hanggang ma-reach natin ng independent level and the students are on their own. Very minimal ng teacher support at the end of the explicit teaching. Dorn in 2013 calls it an apprenticeship process. So how do we scaffold readers within a stretched band of complexity? Ang ibig sabihin ng band of complexity, within grade level. So ang Lexile score will put the readability measure of a text, for example, for grades 2 to 3 or grades 6 to 9, ganon. No? So may upper range, may lower range. And then in the reading jargon, in the jargon of English and reading teachers, we have what we call reading at the independent level, reading at the instructional level, and reading at the frustration level. So meron tayong mga ganon na jargon sila. Okay, maybe you don't know about this. But the scale for helping scaffolding success on complex texts will look like this. So pag independent text nila, student self-regulation. Pag instructional level ang material, then meron pang prompting and scaffolding. But when you are at the frustration level or it's really complex, then a lot of mentoring, a lot of instruction are built into it. Okay? Minsan kasi sabi, wag na lang nating basahin kung difficult yan. Abdi sasabihin naman ng supervisor, aba kailangan yan, mag-a-appear yan sa quarterly exam. Okay? So wala kang magagawa yun. So gagawin mo na lang, pasaulo mo na lang yung ano, or sabihin mo na lang sa kanila kung anong sinasabi ng text, no? That's a cop-out. You take the easy way out. Okay? Anyway, this input will lead us to the next activity.